208. So, welcome, members of the Defense Force, Trinidad and Tobago, as we reconvene this 20th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on National Security. I would remind us and the general public that this meeting is being recorded for future broadcasts on the Parliament Channel 11, Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel to view. The process and the modus operandi that we use in this meeting, I want to remind the committee members and the officials that you direct your questions and concern through the chair, and we will activate our microphones when we are speaking. When we are finished, we would turn off the microphones. I want to welcome the members present, Air Vice Marshal Daryl Daniel, Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Ashok Singh, Director of Operations, Lieutenant Colonel Keston Charles, Acting Commanding Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, Lieutenant Commander Akhenaton Isaac, Acting Commanding Officer of Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, Commander Zin Mark King, Director of Staff and Judge Advocate, Major David Benjamin, Director Specialized Youth and Service Programs. Also, we would want to welcome Wing Commander Kemba Hanez, Inspector General, Lieutenant Colonel Sheldon Ramnaran, Inspector General also. We want to welcome you. Squadron Leader Sheldon DeGans, Acting Commanding Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard. I haven't missed anyone, have I? I see that Squadron Leader Sheldon DeGans is not coming, and Wing Commander Kemba Hanez is replacing him, correct? I've gotten everyone. So, welcome. I'd want to invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with, of course, the Vice Chairman.
Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry, and thank you for joining us. Paul Richards, Vice Chair.
Good afternoon. Richie Sukai, Member.
Good afternoon. Rudal Munilal, Member.
Good.
I will now invite the officials to introduce themselves, beginning with the Chief of Defense Staff.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, Madam Members. I am Air Vice Marshal Daryl Daniel, Chief of Defense Staff. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, distinguished members. I am Lieutenant Colonel Keston Charles, the Acting Commanding Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment.
Good day, Chair, Vice Chair, members, listening and viewing public. I am Lieutenant Commander Akhenaton Isaac, Acting Commanding Officer, Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members. I am Wing Commander Hanez, Acting Commanding Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members. I am Lieutenant Colonel Sheldon Ramanan, Inspector General, Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, honorable members. I am Commander Zin Mark King, Director Staff, Judge Advocate, Defense Force.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, honorable members. I am Lieutenant Colonel Ashok Singh, Director Operations of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, honorable members. I am Major David Benjamin, the Director of the Specialized Youth Service Programs.
Well, welcome once more. We would now invite very brief opening remarks from Air Vice Marshal Daryl Daniel, Chief of Defense Staff.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Chairman, honorable members of the Joint Select Committee on National Security, citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago who are viewing and listening, a pleasant good afternoon. Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, abbreviated as TTDF, inauguration occurred on the eve of independence 60 years ago. Consequently, a military institution then comprising the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment and the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard was established to defend the sovereignty of our nation and its people. And we continue to hold true to this mandate today, with our mission statement being to defend Trinidad and Tobago against internal and external threats, to secure its national interests, and to support state and non-state agencies pursuant to national development. Our vision is to be a professional, motivated, and resilient force within an ever-changing environment, with highly trained, versatile, dedicated, and disciplined service personnel. 60 years on, the TTDF now consists of the Regiment, Coast Guard, Air Guard, and Reserves. Influenced by contemporary national security issues that range from pandemics, transnational organized crime, terrorism, climate change and its impact on the environment, violent extremism in various forms, energy security, and most recently, the renewed security issue of global greater power competition, these issues continue to shape the responsibilities and duties of your nation's military. Our mission recognizes the increasing importance of integrating military means and capabilities with all instruments of national capability to meet the current and future challenges, both domestically and regionally. Navigating this ever-evolving future, your Defence Force is committed to facilitating and building a focused, collaborative approach that endeavors to realize a safe and secure nation. The TTDF strives to maintain this collaborative approach by focusing on building partnerships locally, regionally, and internationally, developing systems and procedures, being a perpetual learning institution, and optimizing all available military resources. One of our most enduring partnerships and the focus of this Joint Select Committee on National Security is the collaboration between the Defence Force and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. The Defence Force and Police Service have collaborated since the inception of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, and this relationship has strengthened over the years. Emerging threats have been the catalyst for deeper coordination and collaboration. Almost on a daily basis, the TTDF's Director of Operations, who introduced himself a short while ago, and the TTPS's DCP operations collaborate on the implementation of anti-crime strategies of the TTPS to address criminal activities in Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular, the areas of focus highlighted by this Joint Select Committee. Honourable Chairman, I thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, this evidential session is really to gain an understanding of the collaborative efforts. Let me start over. This evidential session is really to gain an understanding of the collaborative efforts between the Defence Force and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in the implementation of anti-crime strategies to address criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago. You would know that criminal activity and crime in Trinidad and Tobago, as with any country, is something that is of concern to each citizen. And in that regard, we'd want to hear from the Defence Force as to its collaborative efforts and its plans. That being said, I would want to start the questioning going by asking you, how is the collaboration, or is there collaboration between the Defence Force and Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, specifically as it relates to anti-crime strategies?
Thank you, Chair. On a daily basis, almost, the Director of Operations for the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force and the DCP Operations for Police will meet to discuss how the Defence Force will be required to assist the police in their anti-crime operations. If you'd allow me, Chair, I'd like Colonel Singh to expound on that point.
Yes?
Honourable Chair, good afternoon once again. As indicated, one of the responsibilities of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force is the provision of military aid to the civil powers. And as the Chief of Defence Staff would have highlighted, since our inception, we've constantly provided military aid to the constituted law enforcement agency to treat with crime and criminality, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And within recent time, more so in its crime-fighting initiatives to combat the scourge of illegal firearms and ammunition. Traditionally, this assistance was requested at specific times during the year, namely Christmas into the Carnival season, and in instances where specific expertise or military skill sets were required, such as rural or jungle-type terrain, personnel or resources in that instance, or within the territorial waters of Trinidad and Tobago. As we continue to collaborate in and around 2001, as the correlation between criminal gangs and illegal firearms persisted, the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force partnered with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to form the Interagency Task Force. And this was to treat specifically with gang violence within the Laventil, Beetham, and Sealots area. The Interagency Task Force proved to be successful and continues to do patrols daily in these areas and other areas. Indeed, Honourable Chair, the IATF model was replicated within Central in the Enterprise area, as rival gangs also perpetuated a wave of violence within that community. And while illegal firearms were available to gangs, the type of firearms and the quantity of ammunition available to these gangs was at that time low. In recent times, however, Honourable Chair, with increasing accessibility and the ability for gangs to acquire illegal firearms of greater sophistication and greater quantities of ammunition, coupled with gangs moving into new areas and a rise in new gangs, the TTPS has requested more assistance from the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force. In 2017, the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force increased the assistance to the TTPS by providing personnel to conduct patrols, foot patrols, mobile patrols, and static patrols in all TTPS divisions. The TTDF also collaborated with the TTPS on intelligence sharing and maintained standby elements at all its camps and bases to conduct intelligence-led targeted operations as indicated by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And the focus of these operations were mainly the seizure of illegal firearms and ammunition. The TTDF would have conducted in 2021 11,333 patrols, and in 2022, 8,824 patrols with the TTPS. Honourable Chair, you would realize that there was a decrease from 2021 to 2022 by approximately 22%, and this was on account of the state of emergency from 15th of May 2021 to the 17th of November 2021, during which time the TTDF would have conducted patrols on its own. As we continue to collaborate with the TTPS specific to crime-fighting initiatives, the TTDF also continues to conduct border patrols in all of its domains, air, land, and sea, utilizing a joint operational approach to protect our borders and prevent illegal firearms and ammunition from reaching our shores. So the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, through maritime dominance in key areas, assisted by aerial patrols of the Air Guard, radar surveillance, and long-range foot patrols from the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment in rural jungle-type areas. They seek to provide a deterrence to prevent illegal firearms and ammunition from reaching our shores. And we continue, Honourable Chair, to support the new crime-fighting initiatives from the TTPS based on the TTPS objectives. The TTDF also focuses on assisting with other factors that influence crime, and you will hear more of our youth-type programs, and this is addressed through various initiatives in this regard. And of course, we continue to collaborate with the Defence Force Intelligence Unit and collaborate with TTPS and other stakeholders in sharing intelligence and resources, in providing good situational awareness of what's going on in Trinidad and Tobago through the National Intelligence Fusion Center and the National Operations Fusion Center. And additionally, and in closing, Honorable Chair, the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force continues to contribute to the drafting of the National Action Plan against the proliferation of illegal firearms. This is currently being conducted by the Ministry of National Security in conjunction with the United Nations Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, otherwise commonly known as UN-LIREC, and there are 4 main objectives with regards to this National Action Crime Plan that I will not go into at this point in time. At this point in time, I would yield for questions through the Chief of Defence Staff or to myself directly, Honourable Chair.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive response. I would want Member Paul Richards to continue the questioning, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon again and welcome. Following the opening presentation from Air Vice Marshal Daniel, Chief of Defence Staff, and your colleague, in terms of your collaboration with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and your mandate in contributing to public security and safety, how significant are your resources engaged in specifically dealing with what is on record by the Minister of National Security and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service regarding transnational drug gangs operating in Trinidad and Tobago, the interdiction of those, and also their intersection with domestic or international terrorists?
Thank you, Chair. Our interaction with respect to that question is based on the intelligence that we would have from the relevant intelligence agencies, and we would meet with them and the TTPS, and they would do targeted operations based on identifying these individuals. We would appreciate, based on these individuals coming from abroad and they're going into the woodworks per se with the local gangs, it is only based on intelligence that you'll be able to target them. So once the police and ourselves understand the targets that we want to go after in terms of identifying where they are, who they are affiliated with, operations will be mounted to address that issue.
So you're presently engaged in operations with the TTPS in terms of dealing with transnational gangs operating with local gangs and the intersection with, and I'm using the word specifically here, domestic or international terrorists, because it's the Minister of National Security is on record as saying there was a threat to local national security at one point, relatively recently, regarding terrorist operations in this country.
Honourable Chair, so yes, that is an ongoing operation, and I want to stress that it is intelligence-driven. Once the intelligence provides actionable information, then an operation will be put in place to address that issue.
The operations have been done in terms of this kind of intervention?
From time to time, yes.
With the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force?
And the police service.
Is it a regular part of your collaboration with the TT Police Service? Dealing specifically now, because the issue of crime in Trinidad and Tobago now has been widened to include these transnational gangs, and some may suspect funding for terrorism, etc., exacerbating our crime situation in this country.
I want to stress it is intelligence-driven, and based on the intelligence gathered and the analysis of the operation and what is happening, the operations would be put in place to address the issue accordingly. Intelligence is not collected instantaneously. It takes time, especially when you look at the networks that these gangs may have, to understand that you don't want to go after the wrong individual. You'd want to go for the head. So most times it takes some time to do that, and then you prioritize the operations you'd want to do to address that situation. But stand assured that it continues to be addressed by collaboration between the relevant agencies.
Given what happened in this country in 1990 and the information regarding the possible influence of external extremists, is that of concern significantly to the TC Defence Force in terms of possible domestic or international terrorist seeking to destabilize this country?
Chair, because you mentioned international influence, that is where international partners come in. And I would say here that we have and continue to cooperate with our international partners who would bring information and intelligence to address those issues should it become a concern. These are targets that are monitored as required, not necessarily by us, but by our international partners. And if that is going to impact our national security landscape, then we get the information as we continually do as necessary, and we put operations in place to deal with it. Or we continue to do the monitoring that is required until we have actionable intelligence.
You said, should it be of concern? Is it of concern now?
It is always of concern, Honourable Member, and it is something we continually do. We have persons that we would be monitoring, and as I said, when the intelligence is actionable, operations will be put in place to address the issue accordingly.
You said it's being monitored. Is the TT Defence Force actively involved in intelligence gathering?
Yes, we are.
Is that intelligence shared with the TTPS, and what is the process for that sort of exchange?
So the intelligence from a national perspective is coordinated at the National Intelligence Fusion Center, and at that same location we have the National Operations Fusion Center. So the intelligence guides the operations that happens from a national level. These operations can be individual to the entity, i.e. TTPS or Defence Force, Coast Guard, or it can be a joint operations. But you'd appreciate that these things would happen without the public knowing for obvious reasons. But it is something that is continually done. The intelligence is always ongoing. And as I said, once the intelligence provides actionable operations, those are put in place to address the issue.
In your interactions with the TTPS, in terms of your ongoing joint operations, there had been some issues in the past, well, some concerns, let me not say issues, where the remit of the TTPS versus the remit of the TT Defence Force on operations that may or may not provide opportunities for evidence gathering may arise. Have those issues of possession of evidence, transfer of evidence, the specific role of the TT Defence Force within our legal framework been ironed out? Because, to my knowledge, if the operation is ongoing, the TT Defence Force may not be able to arrest, the police have to arrest. If that is the case, who actually gathers the evidence so that the evidential possession train doesn't become contaminated if a court matter ensues from it? Have those sorts of issues been resolved?
Chair, those issues are always resolved from the inception of the operations. The Defence Force is aware that we are not a law enforcement agency, and thus we would not have the training and the expertise to deal with evidence and taking matters to court. What role we provide with the police operations, the joint operations, is assistance. So you find on an operation, we would help the police secure the area, and the police officers are the ones who would go in to collect evidence and do arrest and such. Thus, there is no complication with respect to the Defence Force doing things that we are not trained to do or authorized by the law to do.
My final question before I yield to one of my colleagues. You mentioned part of your mandate is dealing with emerging threats. What are some of the emerging threats facing Trinidad and Tobago?
I'll give you an example. So during the COVID pandemic, you had the issue of, and the challenge we have with our neighbors next door, Venezuela. You have migrants coming in droves, and you would appreciate with 320 plus nautical miles of coastline, it is almost impossible to be everywhere all the time. And sometimes you get 5 vessels coming across the border, and we have a Coast Guard vessel or maybe 2 to respond. So it means likelihood
5
that
vessels at once?
Yes, that is the tactics they use. I'm just giving you an example. So 5 pirogues would come with the varying people on board, and we don't have 5 Coast Guard vessels to be out there all the time. And then we have, as I say, 320 nautical miles of coastline to cover. So it means that at least 3 vessels will get to shore. During the COVID pandemic, you would have the problem where these people now would have gotten ashore and get into our systems, and we've had issues with health challenges because you're not sure what health challenges these individuals have, and then they go into our population.
If I could ask you just to put a pin, because I can follow up on something there. So let's just say for that scenario, there's 5 vessels are trying to get into Trinidad and Tobago. The Coast Guard can respond to 2. You're working with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and I'm presuming TT Coast Guard in these sorts of interdictions. Is your information sharing not tell you that, well, there are particular ports where these 5 vessels may land in Trinidad and Tobago, so even if you can't catch them, intercept them in the sea, they must land somewhere so they can be associated initiatives for the police to pick up those who land at shore. Are those sort of strategies being employed? Because just to say, well, 5 come in, we only have vessels to interdict 2, and the other 2 will land, the other 3 will land, doesn't seem like a foolproof plan to me. And I'm not a security expert, so I'm asking a question.
So I would not have explained the whole scenario. So this is done in conjunction, as was mentioned by the Director of Operations, describing how we do operations. We have the coastal radar surveillance system, you have the Coast Guard vessels, and you have the aircraft that will give us air coverage. So in the example I gave you, the 5 vessels, the radar would definitely pick up the 5 vessels, which is why I can give you the example of 5 vessels. Based on the Coast Guard assets we have, we may intercept 2, we may intercept 1. However, based on the radar, we will see where they land. If I use the South Coast, and you understand the geography of the South Coast, there are not many road networks, but there's long beachways that you can land. So you'd have to make yourself through the forest and so on. So based on understanding that operations will be put in place to, and I want to be careful not to say too much, but operations will be put in place to address the gaps that you have identified with cooperation with our land forces, with the TTPS, and we do what best we can based on understanding the challenge of the geography of, for example, the South Coast. Also, you have to appreciate that sometimes you can land one place or you're going to land somewhere, and based on what you see that you may be facing, you turn and go back out. And within 20 minutes, you're across the line. And you can play the cat and mouse game of just waiting on the line until you have to go back to your base for fuel, for changing out your crew, and then that's in the daytime. Picture this happening in the nighttime, when you're not seeing. The radars telling you have contacts, but you can't see them. And with the example of 5 landing, you can see the challenges.
Thank you.
Member Rishi Sukai.
Chair, thank you. And before I start, I want to once more commend and compliment the members of the Defence Force, both your men and women of the Defence Force, for the work that you've been doing to keep Trinidad and Tobago safe. I guess this joint select committee is just to keep everything in check and to be able to have, collaboration going forward so that we could both help each other. So one of the questions I want to come back is talking about the joint effort with TTPS. Like specifically, your colleague mentioned around the Beetham area where it's heavily gang-related crime incidents, and also recently, or very recently, in Shoguna's area where you have the Enterprise and other areas that are considered hotspots. You have the Defence Force in collaboration with TTPS. What sort of statistics are gathered in terms of success rate on these initiatives, and why is it that as soon as the element is removed of the Defence Force, everything goes back to square one? What is it that we're doing wrong, and is it that this is the wrong approach? I just want to know, what is your take on this?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Chair, through you, the challenge we have is that we are putting law enforcement officers in combination with the Defence Force to address an outcome. What we have to do and what we are doing, in addition to doing that, because you want to curb the violence that you see in our different communities. So when we do those operations, that is what we are doing. We are being a deterrent, and sometimes we will catch the persons along with the police, and they will be prosecuted through the law. However, the ideal thing, and which is happening based on efforts through ourselves and the police, is that you're trying to get those citizens to make better choices so that they would not go into violence and doing the other things that they're doing. And you'd understand if they're not doing those things, then you don't need the police and the defense force to be in the communities to address those issues, because they will be playing football, involved in sports, involved in production, involved in better employment. And those are efforts that are happening. I'll give you an example. So police has the police youth clubs in some of these challenging areas to get the youths who are the ones who tend to provide the challenges that we're having. And if they are better occupied, then you will not have the problem. So we continue to do the deterrent actions that we are doing based on the operations, but at the same time, we do the other efforts to give people options for better choices for their life.
Thank you. Any statistics, by chance, you could provide?
That would be best provided by the police, because they would be the ones working on those issues. As I say, we generally support them, and they would have, we will work along with them to identify and debrief after operations, but the statistics would better come from the police.
Chair, thank you once more. Another question through you, Chair, is you said something very, very profound when you look at these youth around the area and to be able to engage them in different activities. While the Defense Force or TTPS is there, do you all have like a recruitment program? And what is right now your current recruitment strategy for new members to the different entities? What is it? I mean, I've studied, and why I'm bringing this to you is that coming from my international background, I've seen where like the Air Force and the Marines would have had their booths set up at the universities, at different areas where youth are guarded, and try and promote the beauty of being a Marine, the beauty of being and I admire you all in your swanking suits. So I want to know, what are the efforts, and when you go into these areas, do you have a recruitment program to try and engage some of these youth for a better life?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Chair, through you, on an ongoing basis, the Defence Force provides career guidance opportunities where schools invite us from all different parts of Trinidad and Tobago. And on those occasions, we would send representatives of all the formations within the Defence Force. So their students, young, whether it's primary school or secondary school, get to interact with our persons and get to see and learn what are the opportunities they have for joining the Defence Force. The Defence Force is open to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to avail themselves of the opportunity to become members. Once the ad goes out, it is open to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, male, female, once you meet the different criteria.
So, Chair, again through you, this is you're saying that is once the entities reach out to you, but do you then do it like, okay, for instance, I'm going in an area, whether it's the BTUM or whether it is Enterprise, right? And you know that there are a huge catchment of youth that are basically lost and they lack that identity and they're looking for that. Do you then have that softer side? I'm just asking because to me, the softer approach will tend to, ease the tension in the area and show a different, a different face. I'm just asking, what do you think about?
Thank you, Member. And yes, there is that softer side to our approach. So these patrols that would have been mentioned, the IATF, they don't just go into the area and do hard operations. They also go based on patrolling and stuff. They stop and interact with the community and provide what you're talking about, encourage, and the youths and other persons within the area are free to come and speak with them, which they do from time to time, and they have the opportunity, as you're asking, to learn and understand that you can become a member and you can make a better choice to become a better citizen in Trinidad and Tobago. And
what is do you have like statistics in terms of engagement when you go into the community and recruitment from that avenue? Just, have an idea, does it really sends a message to the youth of those hotspots?
Again, the police will be better positioned to do that, but I can tell you that we do cooperate with them and we're going to have activities in these hotspots for just that reason, to give them the opportunity to provide a safe ground where these activities can happen. I'll give you an example. So there's a pool program that the Defence Force is lead on. We have community pools in some of these challenging areas. You have in Laventille, you have in Mover, and you have in Hockett. I'll give you an example of something that happened in Laventille. We would appreciate the challenge in that hotspot area. So we have programs running Monday to Friday, and this entails programs for the elderly down to the primary school. However, on weekends, it is open to everybody to come. And there was an incident that took place where two groups of individuals that weren't as friendly as they should be came to the pool and squared off. And we said, no, this is neutral ground, and everybody has to benefit. And we were able to facilitate those two groups who would not normally be cooperating and enjoying time together. They were able to do that. So that's an example of how we do things in the community besides the hard, and we do the soft as well.
The member is new and he's eager and enthusiastic. So remember, we will revert on the second rounds before.
Thank you, Chair.
Member Monilal, you would of course give way to Member Lachmedial. Thank you kindly, sir.
Good afternoon. We've heard a lot about the soft approach. I want to touch a little bit on the hard approach now, and specifically I want to deal with an issue, I assume as the top brass, so to speak, in the TTDF, you would be concerned about as well as most of the public, and that is the prevalence of TTDF-marked ammunition, as well as other paraphernalia being found and being used on crime scenes. Late last year, we had several reports, and I have a couple of them here dealing with Regiment Air Guard spent shells being found at a murder scene, one in Piaco, one in the Tunapuna Market. I noted a press release from the regiment stating that they wish to reassure the public that systems are in place to safeguard our ammunition from falling into the hands of criminal elements, and this includes accounting procedures to prevent occurrences of unauthorized use. That was issued on the 29th of December. On the 23rd of December, the minister also assured the public at a public function that measures have been introduced to prevent the developing trend. However, on the 3rd, I think it was of January, another woman was shot and 7 spent shells were found somewhere in the Maloney area with Trinidad and Tobago regiment markings on those bullets. So, getting right down to the question, what are the current mechanisms that you all are using to regulate the personnel who may be on the wrong side of the law? What mechanisms are you using to really keep a track of the ammunition? Because, of course, ammunition getting into the wrong hands, you're basically, you may have rogue members of your organization enabling crime and criminality. And, of course, we want to, we are cognizant of the fact that once law enforcement appears, or members of law enforcement appear to be contributing to enabling or working alongside the criminal element, that instills a greater level of fear in the public. So could you give us a little rundown of how you are treating now with this emerging trend that we've seen coming up time and time again? It's been the subject of several editorials, of course, expressing the public sentiment that is, prevalent right now.
Thank you very much, Member. Chair, through you. That is very disturbing to the Defence Force to understand that is happening there because of what we stand for. So it is not something we are taking lightly. We are working with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to see and work on addressing that issue. In terms of what measures we have in place, from inception, military always has stringent measures in place when it comes to arms and ammunition and other equipment as well. The challenge is this: the human factor is part of it. You have people who understand their roles and function, or should understand their role and functions, and sometimes they may not live up to what is expected. Hence, you would have to take the necessary action, and from a military perspective and from a law perspective, to address those issues.
Stick up in there. Would you, by any chance, know off the top of your head, or maybe one of the other gentlemen, how many persons in the Defence Force or the different arms in the Defence Force might have been subject to disciplinary, I think you'll call it court-martial type proceedings as a result of ammunition or uniforms or so on being used illegally or being misplaced and that sort of thing? In, let's say, the last year?
In the last year, I would be aware of if there were any cases, and there are none so far.
Okay.
We are working with the police based on the investigation. You would appreciate, hopefully, that evidence has to be collected and connected back to an individual for you to prosecute them. And that is something that is not easily done. Especially if you think about an ammunition, it would have different fingerprints on it, if there is any at all. So, but we continue to work with the police to address this very serious and challenging issue, because it's not something you want. You would appreciate there's a trust factor when it comes to members of the defense force, because we deal with arms and ammunition. We're out there when you, if I give an example, going out on patrol, you're given a weapon and ammunition to go and do your duty, and hopefully you won't have to use it, because you'd appreciate what a military individual does versus what a police officer who is to protect and serve, which is part of the challenge. That you want to limit your military personnel doing law enforcement duties, because our training is two different things.
Right.
Getting back to the point of the measures we have in place to address and avoid what we see happening is that we would have done an audit. I would have tasked the Inspector General to do an audit recently, and I'll ask him to come in now to let you hear it straight from him, because he works directly for me to give you that information.
You preempted my next question. My next question was actually about an audit, so I'm happy to move to that, to hear about the audit.
Thank you, Chief of Defence Staff, sir, Honourable Member and Honourable Chair. So, in late December of 2022, the Chief of Defence Staff, and the exact date would be the 27th of December 2022, Chief of Defence Staff, Air Vice Marshal Daryl Daniel, would have given a directive to myself in my capacity as the Inspector General. As the Inspector General, my role and responsibility falls into three categories: to treat with issues of complaint, to treat with issues of compliance, and thirdly, to treat with issues of arms and ammunition and the various type of audits. This audit came against the backdrop of what was described by the Honourable Member, the increase in incidents of allegations of spent shells bearing the marking TTR being found on various crime scenes throughout Trinidad and Tobago by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So it was against that backdrop the Chief of Defence Staff found it very disturbing and an urgent and necessary need to have this audit conducted. The audit was convened on the 28th of December 2022. To date, I am pleased to report that 95%, the report is 95% completed. This audit comprised a total of 14 military installations that were visited to date, and these military installations, the audit comprised firstly of briefs being conducted with personnel at the various installations who are involved in dealing with arms and ammunition on a daily basis, and it also involved an actual physical inspection of the various arms and ammunition stored at the various installations. Now, in order to maintain a level of independence and transparency in the conduct of this audit, the Chief of Defence Staff directed that, for example, if the audit is being done on a Coast Guard installation, that the audit be done by members from the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, and vice versa, which was done to date. This audit would have been completed, but due to COVID affecting some of the audit members' team, it caused a little delay, as well as COVID at various installations. Our preliminary findings so far would have revealed that all arms and ammunition were in fact so far accounted for. The actual audit is in fact completed. The report is being compiled and it's 95% completed at this stage. And separate and apart from the audit, I'm also pleased to state that during the course of the audit taking place, this Inspector General audit, we realized that the individual formations, the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, the Air Guard, would have been doing their own internal audit at the same time.
I'm a bit surprised to hear that, because what is being reported by the TTPS is that, a number of spent shells, and of course, it triggered in my mind when Air Vice Marshal Daniel mentioned that, the training for Defense Force is different. Some of the bullets and spent shells being found at crime scenes are being used in AR-15s. It's being used in the most, very, very dramatic, one we call a drive-by shooting type scenario. And it's almost like, the population is very concerned about the involvement of members of the Defense Force in perhaps this criminality. So if it is that an audit is being done and almost all the ammunition is being accounted for, that raises even more questions. Is it that somebody is manufacturing ammunition or bringing it into the country and it's being passed off as regiment bullet? I mean, what is the explanation? I think that the country is very interested to find out that. So I would like to think as well that apart from an audit like this that would arise, I'm familiar with, let's say, the TTPS procedure. So I'll just explain it very briefly, and you can tell me if you have a procedure like this. When you do handover, somebody is making a note in the station diary saying X is on the scene, this one goes out, that one is going out on patrol, they return, they had this firearm with them, their numbers, the number of bullets, etc. If something goes missing, the person who makes the entry is the first point of contact. He's responsible because he's making that entry and he was supposed to be checking and so on. And, so you have that kind of check and balance procedure. Is that happening in the Defense Force where people are going out there and being given arms and ammunition? And if that is happening, then how do you explain, or what explanation could you possibly proffer for this audit not really producing any sort of evidence of missing ammunition? But yet all these spent shells, within the last 6 months we've had, I mean, if I sit with these reports and count them up, you're getting, a large amount of rounds of ammunition being found on crime scenes with the markings from the Defense Force.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Chair, the procedures we have in the Defense Force are very stringent. You would go to the armory, you have to sign for the weapon, it is counted, and you go out and you patrol the weapon and the ammunition. When you return, it has to be counted. So it is in the context of that, we are very challenged to understand how wrongs are appearing out there, and the audit would have shown that we can account for everything that we have. So this is hopefully something that will be understood and comprehended as we continue to cooperate with the police in this investigation. Because if I have 1,000 rounds, and when I count and I have the 1,000, but you're finding 100 outside, something is wrong.
Something very wrong.
So we are hoping that the investigation will reveal that. But rest assured, the Defense Force has very stringent procedures in place when it comes to arms and ammunition, as well as other equipment. But because arms and ammunition means, in the military, it says a bullet is a life. So we don't play around with that.
Do you want to ask a question?
Yes. So I just want to ensure that I understand what it is you are saying. So there's a report out there, Member Lakshmi Dayal is saying that these reports, and we all have these reports, that they say that these are rounds of ammunition belonging to the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. You have commissioned an audit, and your audit, your preliminary results from your audit is saying that all ammunition, most, are accounted for, correct?
Yes, Honourable. Yes, Honourable Chair.
If you start with 1,000 and you have 1,000, then you have 1,000 inside, but you have 100 outside. It raises other issues. I hope that your report will be comprehensive enough to maybe, and we don't want you to speculate, but to give some sort of outside of the math, because the math speaks for the math cannot tell a tale. The math is the math. Tell us what what are the views on this other excess. We don't want to preempt anything. Member Munilal, Member Lakshmi Dayal, are you finished, or you had another area to prosecute?
One quick question.
Go ahead.
You said you're cooperating with the TTPS. Could you tell us to date at what stage the forensic examination of those spent shells allegedly belonging to the TTDF if it has been completed, what stage it is at, and if anything of substance has been uncovered with respect to the forensic analysis of those spent shells.
Chair, through you, that is something the police would be better positioned to answer because they are doing the investigation. In terms of our cooperating with them, they can come and they have come to understand the markings that we have so they can do the necessary comparison and so on as we try to trace. On the wrongs, you would also have the batch number. So there's a lot of information and research that will have to be done to get to the bottom of this very serious issue.
Chair, just following Senator Lashmidia's question, my understanding is the audit reports from the TTPS Defence Force are not submitted to the TTPS in investigations of these types of issues unless the request is made by the TTPS regarding a particular line of inquiry or the National Security Council. Has that been done? Has a request been made for any of these audits?
To date, not as yet, member.
Member Munilal?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon again to our guests. Let me begin, Air Vice Marshal Daryl Daniel. Congratulations. I believe you have received an extension of 2 years to continue in your role as Chief of Defence Staff. Congratulations. On that note, could I ask?
Yes.
Could I ask if there's a policy position of the Defence Force as it relates to an important human resource matter? As you know, in the past, we have had a lot of public discussions, and in security circles as well, as to the retirement age of officers, whether or not we should reconsider the fact that in the Defence Force, persons are trained and, healthy and so on, and the retirement age is so relatively young. And we have had over the years officers at the age of 55, I believe, leaving the service and then in some way being absorbed in other areas, that could use their skill. And we did have a recommendation years ago concerning that matter. Is there any thought on the part of the Defence Force whether we should have a review of the age of retirement to ensure that men and women who are recruited and trained and the state spends a good few dollars on training and exposure and giving the sort of expertise that we need, they leave the service too early, too young? Is there any thought on that?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Chair, through you, the Defence Force position, as you would have highlighted in the report from some years ago, is the same position.
And that is?
That is something that we would want considered, and that document you speak to would have recommended, and it's still submitted, and as I say, that is still our position, that we consider revising the age of retirement so that we don't lose the expertise that we have. And as you say,
what is the age?
So the current ages of retirement in the force for sergeants and below is 45.
Yeah.
At warrant officers, you got 47.
Yes.
The senior warrant goes at 55. Warrant officers and chiefs, you got 50. So 45, 47, 50, and 55.
Because, I just will end the point by saying that personally I feel is a really loss of human resource in a sense. And I'm not sure, you may know better than I do, when that age was put in place, but I imagine it would have been some years ago.
Chair, through you, that has been from inception. It would have been what we would have adopted from the colonial masters.
Yes, correct. Okay, I'll just move on now. I wanted you, if it's possible, to give us very briefly an overview of the naval assets of the Coast Guard. What assets are under the command of the Coast Guard, and what at this time are usable and operational?
The assets under the control of the Coast Guard, available to the Coast Guard, are at a serviceability percentage of 50%.
50%.
You would appreciate that there are two assets in the Defence Force that are very expensive and they are not available locally. That would be vessels and aircraft. COVID would have contributed to a challenge with the maintenance of the Coast Guard assets. At the commencement of COVID, the then contractor, based on the globe closing down, the persons in country on that maintenance contract would have departed. That resulted in not having the expertise to keep the vessels maintained, as well as the impact that we had on the shipping to get spares in place. We are currently in the process of closing out and getting that contract back in place, seeing that the world is going back to a normal operation level, and that should improve the serviceability of our Coast Guard assets to get us back to as close to 100% as possible.
Okay. Bearing in mind, we are operating really with 50% of the available capacity, in a sense. Could you tell us, as regards the 4 Damon 50-meter patrol crafts and the 2 utility vessels, are these operational and usable at this moment?
They are not.
They are not. And why is that?
I just highlighted that at the start of COVID, the contract for maintenance was frustrated because the persons in country to assist the Coast Guard in maintaining these vessels departed for reasons because we didn't understand then what this global pandemic was going to do. So they left because of families and so on, because you'd appreciate they are from Netherlands and they will be back and forth, and with the globe closing down, they left. They also had the challenge of not getting the spares that we would have, because there's a certain level of repairs and maintenance that the Coast Guard was trained to be able to do. But without the spares, you had that challenge. And as I mentioned, the process is in place to get these vessels back up and running, to get the contract back in place, and get the spares in country so that we can get the vessels back and serving. But that is 50% of the vessels, so we have the other 50% managing the requirements of the Coast Guard. And that is done in conjunction with the radar, because I described the challenge of the vast coastline we have to survey and monitor. So what we do is use our assets to do that as efficiently and effectively as possible without giving out too much information.
Sure. Instead of using 50%, 20%, and so on, if you could tell me in absolute numbers what that means, because I may not have in my head, when you say 50%, how much vessels is that? Is that 1, 2, 3?
Let me, Chair, I'll let the CEO Coast Guard. I don't want to hog the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. Honourable Member, Chair, through you, the number of vessels that we do actually have in our surface fleet would be 14.
So 7 are operational and usable at this moment?
Yes.
Could you, why I'm drilling down is because I know you gave a blanket answer for the, to describe the position with the 50% that is not at this moment usable. But I just wanted to zero down and drill down on the nature of the vessels and the identity. The 6 fast patrol hostile vessels, are any being used at this moment?
The hostile vessels are being used at this moment.
They are being, all 6?
5 of them.
5 of them. Could I indicate as well, the Damon vessels, are they being dry docked in Suriname or were they there before?
During the maintenance contract that was in place, they would have dry docked in Curacao and Suriname as part of that project. And as I mentioned, once we get the project back in place, which we are doing, that will commence and continue. In addition to getting the spares, that when we have those spares, we can do the maintenance that we can do ourselves, which will get vessels back in place.
Could I ask as well, moving from the vessels per se, the capacity of the Defence Force in terms of the crews, the trained crewmen required for those vessels, is there capacity? Do we have the capacity? I know we have some problems with maintenance and so on, but what about the manpower itself? Is that in place?
Yes, that is in place.
Fine. If you could just allow me now to go to the Air Guard. We have had in the public domain, again, looking at newspapers and so on, some information in the public space about the complement of helicopters, which is a critical part of the operations and used over the years to support the TTPS and other law enforcement. Could you give us now an overview of the Air Guard? What is in their possession at this time, and what is usable, serviceable, and what is not?
In the the Air Guard, currently we have 6 rotary wing assets and 2 fixed wing assets. The fixed wing assets are available for service and provide that assistance with respect to border security. In terms of the rotary wing assets, we have 2 of them serviceable, and you would have seen 1 in operation over the Carnival period.
There's also in the public domain some information about the departure of trained pilots from the service. What is the situation with that in the Air Guard now, in terms of the complement and the requirement to operationalize these helicopters?
I'll ask the acting CEO Air Guard to come in again to give you direction.
Thank you, sir. Chair, through you. With regard to that specific newspaper report that suggested that all of the trained pilots were leaving the Air Guard, one of the pilots who was a civilian contracted helicopter pilot would have left. The others, which was 2 of them, who continue to operate on the line, they remain with us. As a matter of fact, we intend to engage them in a longer-term contract than they are currently engaged in. So we have the capacity, both pilot in command as well as co-pilot where helicopters are concerned, as well as we have the same sort of capacity to operate the fixed-wing aircraft at this time.
Yeah. Just for absolute clarity, we heard earlier there are 8 helicopters. Is it 8? You said 6 and 2. Just explain that once again, please, because I'm not getting it clearly. And this, as you know, while we are not live now, this entire thing will be shown, I imagine, to the national community.
So I highlighted we had 6 helicopters and 2 fixed-wing aircraft. So
aircrafts, right, great. The fixed-wing aircrafts, the helicopters, and you cooperate with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service on a regular basis with the use of this type of support?
Yes, I highlighted earlier that you would have seen one of the helicopters in operations over the Carnival period. Again, based on coordination and the requests, for example, you would have done an overview of, before the commencement of Carnival, the Gold Commander would have gone up in the helicopter to get an overview and appreciation for what he would have to, the challenge he would have to deal for the Carnival operations. And that continues. Based on the requests that come from the police, we would support them with the air support as necessary.
Fine, thank you. I'll come back. Thank you very much.
All right. Member Suka, you have a question?
Yeah, just to compliment Member Munilal's contribution, or question, sorry. I know from November 2022, I believe, I'm looking at your, this document was sent and replies from you all. You currently have 4 vessels that are serviceable. However, the specific operation for the Coast Guard, so I know from the question that Member Munilal said, you gave a figure of 14, but 7 are currently serviceable, right? So therefore, you got the other 3 working?
Correct.
Okay, and now these vessels, are they under warranty from manufacturer, that you have a specific contract with the manufacturer that this is the nature of the work that's been done with them?
The vessels, yes, would be under warranty, as well as some of the equipment. And based on the contract for the maintenance, you will have varying challenges in terms of if it's an equipment manufacturer defect or if it's an operational defect based on issues you have when you're operating the vessels. But based on, as I said, the maintenance contract in place, we would have the vessels repaired to make sure that they're brought back into serviceability as soon as possible.
Last question, because I like the idea of service. Is there any vessels right now that you know are low-hanging fruits? Maybe it's just missing something that's very, accessible, and there's some sort of blockage in the system that's preventing it?
So I highlighted the current challenge globally with shipping and getting parts, and I highlighted that before. All these spares for aircraft and vessels, 1, they cause foreign exchange, and 2, they come from countries far away. And there's an increase in shipping costs, and there's also, because of what happened during COVID, you have limited spares available. So countries like us who have smaller fleets would not get priority based on those kind of challenges. So as I said, we are in negotiations to do our best with the companies concerned to get our maintenance back in place.
Do you know if, by chance, and last question and concerning this, do you know if it's engine related or if it's something else component with the boat? I just want to have an idea if what is the holdback.
It is varying factors.
You ask your question.
Thank you.
Do not take on Senator Munir. And
Yeah,
you hold Senator Rajmedia.
Go ahead.
Senator Richards, and I will.
Just for clarity, I was distracted, so I apologize. Is it, through you, Chairman, to Wing Commander Hannes, is it that the Air Guard is not flying now because of the challenges?
We operate, through you, Chair, Honourable Member, we operate both fixed and rotary wing aircraft at this time.
So you're operating?
Yes.
Is the TC Defence Force engaged in any operations specifically dealing with illegal quarrying in the Northern Range?
Yes, we are. In conjunction with the police and members of the energy industry, there is a lead by the police, and we would do patrols and put operations in place to try to address that very lucrative challenge that exists.
I'm glad you used the adjective lucrative. How acute is this problem in Trinidad and Tobago? I remember some years ago, I had the opportunity to do some training with the Air Guard, and they took us on a fly over parts of the Northern Range, and we wanted to go closer, and we were told we can't because they would shoot at the craft if we flew closer, because it was such a profound problem. One, dealing with illegal quarrying through air surveillance and then getting personnel up there to actually on the ground break up, dismantle the operations, in addition to dealing with illegal marijuana plantations, etc., in the more forested parts of the Northern Range. How much of an issue is this illegal quarrying problem? You used the word lucrative, and lucrative could only come if it's been able to continue for a while without successful intervention.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Chair, through you, I can speak to that because at the National Operations Fusion Center, and based on briefs that we would get from the National Intelligence Fusion Center, I'm aware of how lucrative that challenge is. Without saying too much, operations continue to be put in place to try to address that issue with the lead of the police, because you'd appreciate they would have to prosecute, you'd have to find people, get them in the act and so on, and there's a challenge where that is concerned. But this is an issue that continues to be addressed because of how significant it is, and the purse of the public is losing money.
Put a pin, if you please, if you can. If illegal quarrying sites, usually buried deep in the Northern Range, have been identified by air surveillance, and those sites have been deemed to be illegal because the TNT Extractive Industries Agency has identified that as a major problem facing Trinidad and Tobago's extractive industries. It has been ongoing for decades. So I'm trying to find out how successful our intervention efforts are, given that you described it as continuing to be lucrative. But for the last 2 decades, we have not seemed to be able to shut down what is clear evidence in large swaths of the Northern Range of illegal quarrying. So whether we can find persons actively involved or identify the quarry and shut them down because of the arms of the national security we have available is confusing to me that it continues, because they don't move a quarry from here to there to hide it. The quarry has to continue here. So what is the challenge in shutting down those illegal quarries if they've been identified?
Honourable Chair, through you, that question could better be answered by those who have the lead on such exercises. The Defence Force will support whichever entities requires our assistance to address that challenge. And as I said, mentioned member, I am aware of it because of it being discussed at the National Operations Fusion Center. There are many facets to the operation that would be required for that to be successful. And there's a lot of compromise because of how lucrative it is.
What does that mean?
the first challenge is that you have to find or catch these people doing this so that you can have the chain reaction of getting all the way to the top. Because the truck driver or the tractor driver who's doing that. And we have had operations where with the Defense Force and police, we would find these equipment and would seize them and they would go to court and be in court, and we would have them stationed at Komuto base while the court session is going on. But that's a truck and a tractor coming out of it. So you'd appreciate that other entities need to do some serious work to understand who's the owner of the quarry, the license, it has to get on the road, where it's being sold, because it has to be sold to somebody. So it's multifaceted in terms of what is needed to address this effectively. And you'd have to get the cooperation of all the entities involved to be successful. That suggests why it has not been successful and the challenge. But I want to assure you that it is something that continues to be on the national landscape from a national security perspective and being discussed to try to address.
My understanding also is that parts of the proceeds from this lucrative business, your words, are being funneled into gangs and possibly, potentially terrorist activity. Care to comment on that?
Honourable Member Chair, through you, this matter continues to be addressed at the national level. I try to highlight how complicated it is, and you would have said it's 20 years, it's been a long problem, and I would think it being such a problem for such a long time suggests the complexity and the difficulty of addressing it. But I can assure you efforts continue to be made to address it.
Without putting you on the spot, or they will to really stop it. My final question, Chairman. Going back to the issue of, because you answered earlier when I asked a question about intelligence gathering, and you indicated that the Defense Force is engaged actively in intelligence gathering, and there's a mechanism in place for sharing that intelligence, working along with the TTPS and other arms of national security. Does the Defense Force track whether intelligence provided has been acted on effectively? If so, can you provide in writing how many instances in the last 5 years that evidence has, from your knowledge, led to interception or curtailment of criminal activity, criminal charges and or convictions, and the uncovering of corrupt law enforcement or other national security officials who may be involved and complicit?
It was asked for in writing, so you will.
Okay.
He asked for in writing, so you provide it in writing.
If I may, Honourable Chair.
Mine a verbal response also now. But also, yeah.
I want to highlight the Defense Force is not law enforcement. So the prosecution, the evidence, and seeing how successful these kind of operations are would come from another entity, not the Defense Force.
Thank you very much. Just to go back to tie up some loose ends from the earlier line of questioning, we gather that there are challenges to maintain and to fix vessels and so on, because we are not up to the optimal level in terms of what is in our possession and what is usable at this time. I think that's clear. Do you have a timeline? Given all the circumstances, by which instead of 50%, we can say we have reached 75%, 80%, 90% of all our vessels being operationalized and utilized for its specific purpose, given all that is happening around us at this time?
Honourable Chair, through you, yes. I highlighted earlier the challenge of a small country with small fleet competing with other global entities with vessels. We are in the process of putting the maintenance contract back in place. As soon as we do that, that will happen. I can't say how cooperative our international partners would be and how much priority we will be given. Rest assured, we are making all the efforts from our side, which we have control over, to put that back in place. So I would not be able to give a timeline.
Sure. Okay, fine. That's fine. Now, I want to dwell on a matter related, I think, to what another member said, but in a different line. Now, one of the challenges with dealing with the criminal enterprise that we have now, that is so prevalent, the matter of illegal arms, ammunition, human trafficking, and all these matters that this committee concerns itself with. has been this issue of corruption in law enforcement, which has been cited in several international reports and in local investigations and so on. And while that has focused to some extent on the TTPS, dealing with, corrupt elements within the TTPS, and over the years, as you may know, the TTPS has given birth to institutions such as the Professional Standards Bureau, the Police Complaint Authority created by statute to deal with complaints against police and acts of alleged acts of corruption and misbehavior by police and so on. In reports as well, they also hint at times as to elements within the defense force, not one specific dimension, but across the board. That maybe it is alleged to be, in cahoots with criminal elements and up to no good, and that has been cited as concern as well, not just with the TTPS, but with defense force, whether it's Coast Guard or regiment, Air Guard, whatever. Are there any new policies, new institutions, new approach within the defense force itself to meet and treat with that type of, there's a global reality as well, with that type of reality and concern?
Thank you very much, Member Chair. Through you, the Inspector General Office that you would have heard about and got some explanation with respect to the investigation, with respect to the ammunition, is a recent establishment within the force as an example to address that issue. We would have amended and are in the process of amending the Defense Act to address issues that we find ourselves currently dealing with. So in 2020, July, we amended the Act to include interdiction in Section 85. So now persons, as you describe, who may be contravening the rules and regulations and laws of the Defense Act that guide us, if they are in a process of being taken through the court system, they are suspended from the defense force with all their rights, and it's in place to even impact their salary. And this is officers or other ranks. So that is an example of things that we have put in place to address these issues we find ourselves dealing with. The members of the defense force come from the Society of Trinidad and Tobago. When we train you, we try to help you to understand what it means to join this fraternity that is the military. Some people take it, most, 99% take to that, as in any other walk in life. And they're the ones who, for one reason or the other, may not take to what we are supposed to stand for, and hence we put things like that in place, the interdiction and other facilitation of the Act to address these issues.
Chairman?
Chairman, may I? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for your answers. By way of just tidying up as well, I just want to go back to two questions. One has to do with the Air Guard, and the commanding officer indicated that, you're engaging persons on contract and so on. Part of the complaint that was reported in the media, and you can correct it if it's wrong, but part of the complaint is that a lot of the pilots and other persons assigned to the Air Guard were on short-term contracts, and they were complaining about the lack of benefits, sick leave, all of those things. Could you tell us about the contractual arrangements you presently have with staff and about the contracts that you propose to enter into with these senior pilots that you're trying to retain with the Air Guard? Some of whom I think were transferred from what was called the NOC, which is now the National Operations Fusion Center. And whether or not they have expressed dissatisfaction with the contractual arrangements, and if you're aware of what steps might be taken to correct that, to find a better solution to their complaints.
Thanks for your question. Chair, through you. So the particular group of persons who were on short-term contracts, those persons who were transferred from the SSA Air Division. Yes, it was called NOC at one point in time. No other civilians. So the Air Guard has a bit of civilian contracted workers that has been working with us throughout because of the kind of specialty we require. These are the first set of persons who have been placed on short-term contract. since inception of the short-term contract was a interim measure while we worked on being able to hire them on a more long-term contract so that they can continue to perform their duties.
Sorry, just one thing. When you say short-term contract for the benefit of the public, are you talking about 3 months, 6 months?
Initially, it was 6 months. Whilst we worked on the long-term contract, it reverted to 3 months. But there was no intent for it to be for a period as long as it lasted. But that would have happened because of the process that we had to go through in order to get the long-term contract approved and go through all of the rigor to be able to be approved by Cabinet.
But at the end of the day, you say so you have 3 months, 6 months, and you're working on long-term contracts, but at the end of the day, everybody's on contract.
So some of our civilian captains are on contract. Some of our captains are uniformed personnel. Some of them regular serving members. Some of them are in the Defence Force Reserves.
Chair, through you, I would like to highlight that the Air Guard would have put out an ad for hiring of helicopter pilots, and these individuals that you are mentioning did not make themselves available for that, because in the military we don't work on contracts, we work as employment, yes, and they did not make themselves available probably because of the pay package that you would get in the military. It's not as lucrative or as attractive, let me use that word, as you might have in civilian pilots. And the challenge would be that the Defence Force is not in full control of these contracts. That happens at other places. So when we would suggest what we want to put in place, and that's where the challenge would come about.
As you mentioned, suggesting what you would like to put in place, given the amount of training that might be necessary, if you take a civilian pilot and have them working in the Air Guard or any civilian that you're bringing in to work into the Defence Force, I mean, would you not find it preferable to move towards permanent staff, or at least as a minimum, long-term 3-year contracts like what pertains in the rest of the public service, because of the amount that would be invested in training someone and having them work with you for 3-month and 6-month periods? I mean, it just seems like a bit, and kind of like instability to an extent.
Thank you, Member. Chair, through you, that is why the military, the Defence Force, we want to bring them in uniform so we don't have those challenges.
Okay, so that is your preference?
Correct, and that is what we are doing. As I said, we would have put out an ad and we got some response, but those individuals you mentioned did not respond and avail themselves of that opportunity, and we would continue to recruit so that we would not have this challenge.
I just want to, because just by way of, in my experience, sometimes persons in law enforcement who are on contract and they may be involved in matters where, arrests are made, seizures are made, etc. And when it's time to find them, how many ever years down the road that they have of evidential value and so on, you can't locate them, they've left the country, they've taken up jobs in Dubai, and you have to go and try to track them down. So I think it's very important for stability and long-term continuity of your operations, seeing it through from whatever it is you do from, today to a conviction 10 years, 15 years down the road, the way things go here, that, you have some stability. And that's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Chair, thank you, and through you. Just 2 quick questions. I know you mentioned some of the vessels that are not in service currently right now. Some of them are docked in Suriname, or is it Curacao, right? And how many of them are docked in Trinidad? Or do you have currently within our jurisdiction that are not serviceable? I just want to have an idea that are in your harbor or your bays that are not serviceable and just waiting to be serviced right now.
Not sure I understand the question.
Okay, you said that one of them is in Curacao, I believe, right? Waiting for the service arrangement to be back in place.
No, when I highlighted about Curacao, I highlighted that we would have used the dry docking facilities in Curacao and Suriname while the contract was in place to maintain these vessels. All the vessels are in Trinidad currently.
So all of the vessels that are out of service, everything is within our shores then?
All the vessels in the fleet of the Coast Guard are in Trinidad currently.
All right, great, thank you. That's it. And also, last question. There's the partnership in terms of the TTPS. coastal surveillance and the riverine units, along with the Coast Guards. Could you share a bit more on that partnership and how it works and like some of the territories you cover, like the small arteries and veins that comes out?
So generally, the operations of the police, coastal and riverine patrol is something they do individually. At times, based on operations or intelligence, and we want to put our operation to address something, we would come together as required and do a joint operation. But generally, the Coast Guard does what it is supposed to do in terms of patrolling the borders, and the riverine and coastal patrol unit of the police do what they are required to do.
So is there, just again, forgive my ignorance, you have the Coast Guard manned in the coastline, obviously, right? And then when they come into land, basically, case in point, let's look at Felicity area. There's this water causeway that comes out from the oceanway into the area that has the cremation ground. I know in the past a lot of alleged nefarious activities and contraband come through there. What is in place right now, or how do you man, like just for example, how do you man that right now?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Chair, through you, I would have highlighted earlier the use of the Coastal Radar Surveillance Center that would give us 360 coverage of the island based on targets being identified. The Air Guard would be used to patrol to confirm targets or not, and the Coast Guard would be sent to intercept these targets as necessary.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just jumping off from there. When was the last time you all had a joint exercise with the TTPS Riverine Patrol Unit?
If you allow me, Chair, to ask your Coast Guard to be current on that.
Thank you very much, sir. Honourable Member, through you, Chair. The last time we would have actually had a joint interaction with the Coastal and Riverine unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. That could have been perhaps about 4 weeks ago. They would actually do, as indicated by the Chief of Defence Staff, the joint patrols.
Joint patrols, okay. Have you have you had any successful seizures of either arms, ammunition, or narcotics when embarking on these joint patrols? Because the way we understood it and the way it was marketed, it was supposed to be just that you all would sort of guard the coastline, and if the persons were to come ashore, the riverine patrol unit would be able to intercept. But to your knowledge, have there been any successful interceptions of arms, ammunition, or narcotics based on these joint efforts between the Coast Guard and TTPS?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. Thus far, we haven't had any large seizures. The Coastal and Riverine Patrol Unit for the TTPS, they have just been established, but we continue to do the actual joint patrols.
Chair, just 1 second. Do you have any idea how many vessels the TTPS have in their possession?
Can't give an accurate response to that.
Tell us the concept of suppression. So you have your units, you have your exercises, and they're primarily geared towards suppression. But suppression in and of itself may not solve recidivism or the filling of the void that is left. Let us say you have a successful suppression exercise as it relates to gangs. So there's a joint exercise, TTPS and TTPS. What exercises or what programs does the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force have in place as it relates to the filling of that void? Do you still work with MILA? Do you still work with MIPAT? What do you have that when you do a suppression exercise and you suppress something, that when you go away, it does not reoccur? Tell the country, what do you have in place for that?
Thank you very much for that question, Chair, to afford us the opportunity to share the other things that we are doing in terms of the soft approach. I'd ask Major Benjamin to take the mic, please.
I don't consider it a soft approach. I consider it a very effective approach. So I don't want to label it that way because I think it could be very effective in helping to deter and also to avoid recidivism. So let's not name it a soft approach, but tell us.
Thank you for that correction, Chair, and I agree with you because it is, if we get that right, I see we'd have less of the problems that we are talking about.
Thank you.
Major Benjamin.
Thank you, sir. Chair, good day, and through you, honorable members. The Defense Force has been involved in youth development work for the past 40 years. Specifically, the Civilian Conservation Corps program has been in existence for the past 28 years. The Civilian Conservation Corps program has a proud alumni of over 30,000 nationals who would have benefited from that program from its inception to date. The program continues, now moved from the Ministry of National Security to the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, where its reach is intended to be expanded as we look at more areas of intervention and spread for that program. That program, the Civilian Conservation Corps, is a 10-month program. It's non-residential, and it targets persons who are deemed as high needs and in need of additional support. Those persons who are unemployed or may be unemployable at the start of the program. Its benchmark is looking at citizenship, civic mindedness training, and also skills development training for the participants of the program. The MILAT program has been in existence for the past 14 years. MILAT has a proud alumni of close to 1,000 young men who would have graduated from the program. MILAT is a military-led academic training program. It's a 2-year residential program catering for persons who would have fragmented from the education system, and they are going back into a 2-year program to be able to reconnect them and have them graduate from that program with CSEC certification. MILAT currently offers 11 subject areas, inclusive of mathematics and English language, and its success rate has been quite good, to say the least, right? And a number of persons have become employed in not only state agencies, the Defense Force, the Protective Services, but have also opened their own businesses based on the successes experienced there. The MyPath program is the brother program to MILAT, MILAT being academic certification and output, the MyPath being technical vocational certification and output. That program has graduated approximately 300 graduates. It was moved from National Security to the Ministry of Education. It's now moved back to us with effect from last year. So we are now re-engineering that program and relaunching that program at 2 locations, at Mausika and what is being deemed as the National Service Complex at Beach Camp in Palo Seco. So we're looking forward to a pilot program of 50 young men in the first instance, and we will then be expanding that program to include young ladies in the very near future.
These programs, you have said MILAT has been in operations for 14 years.
Yes.
Are we sufficiently penetrating the caption audience that we need to penetrate in order to let them make these programs useful and life-changing? Because some of them, I just shared an experience with my vice chair and the secretariat, where I see persons are willing, if they have an opportunity. Chief of Defense Staff, why aren't we, is it that we're not reaching the most vulnerable, the most persons, or the persons who are more at risk to be attracted to the fast life? Aren't we not reaching them enough to say, look, this is an alternative? How do you recommend that we reach these persons? Because MILAT has been around 14 years. That's a long time.
If you'd allow me, I'll ask Major Benjamin, who has been with the program from inception, and his best place I can give you, but I will let him tell you because he has lived it.
Major Benjamin, are we reaching those who the programs were targeted for in the initial instance? And if not, how can we reach them?
Chair, respectfully, these programs are all voluntary programs. The individuals that attend cannot be committed or forced into the program.
Agreed.
Right. So part of the challenge is having persons stay the course of the period of the program. We have some persons who drop out of the program because of its construct.
As any courses.
Right. But we, through the military mentorship process that we utilize, through the strong nature of the residential setting of the program, as well as the administrative processes that we use, we have been able to keep the numbers or to increase the numbers of persons that are retained in the programs over the years. What you realize is that capacity is also an issue. Our programs cater for 100 applicants per year, or receive 100 applicants per year. We have numbers in excess of close to 500 to 600 applicants per year that come, and we could, based on capacity, we can only service a certain number of persons. So capacity is a challenge, right? And it really speaks to the overall demand, and in terms of facilities that are available to us to be able to continue the training cycle.
Just a related question, Major Benjamin. I understand very well the issue of capacity. Is the challenge then that, given the worthiness of these programs, that we should try and increase the resources so that you could increase the capacity for programs like this? And what has been the budget over the last few years? Has that budget been cut and reduced over a period of time?
Chair, through you, honourable member, I would say that capacity is a challenge. However, through the initiatives of the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, what we've recognized is that there's no cookie cutter system where one program is the catch-all or the solution for all of the challenges. When we look at the challenge paradox in our programs, we have persons who are on the cusp of the law in terms of being arrested, as well as persons who are on the other extreme, who may not have resources to be able to educate themselves. So there's a wide spectrum of risk. So you can't say necessarily that you're at risk so that you're in one particular catchment. Yes, the resources to the program have been reduced over time, but what we see coming in the future is other opportunities for training. For example, the Youth Development and the Youth Development and Apprenticeship Centers, what we formerly call the youth camps. The plan is to reintroduce the youth camps, and that will take up some of the slack in terms of places. We also going to be re-engineering the youth development centers, which are the day programs as opposed to the residential programs. So there are a suite of programs that are being further developed and reinstituted. The Defence Force is going to be playing a role as well in a program called the CHINS, which is the restart of the St. Michael's School for Boys, where we increase the capacity from 80, as it was in the past, to 150. So we see where the capacity building in terms of what the programs that exist would be given the multiplier effect.
So would you say, and would you commit Air Vice Marshal and your team to redoubling the efforts to reach the areas throughout Trinidad and Tobago, where there are at-risk youth who need this program? Because I am almost certain that if the demand is there and there are persons who are in need, the government will find the resources once people are accessing it, because it means then that there's an alternative and the alternative is available, but they're accessing the alternative. Would you recommit then to doubling your efforts as it relates to reaching them? We understand that it's voluntary, but sometimes voluntary leads a little massaging, soiree. Have I gotten correctly? A little rubbing in to get it correct. What do you say to that?
Chair, thank you for the question. I would say we will
I got it correct then.
We have no intention of recommitting because we are committed to this. We understand
Redoubling.
we will provide all the resources with the relative support because it will mean we need to recruit additional people to provide this in addition to our duties. We have the ability to do that. We have people that are willing to come and do that because it will make a difference in our society. One of the things that wasn't mentioned that I put on the table also is that we are now doing MILAT for females as well. And you mentioned Tobago. So Tobago has not been left out. Tobago would have had one center. We are now in the throes of having 2 centers, East and West Tobago, to exactly do what you're asking, to cater and spread the capability and the benefit that this will bring to our society.
Yes.
I have 2 other questions.
Okay, just jumping off from everything that was said, it's really a comment, but you could tell me if you think this would work. I find one of the challenges we have in this country is what I just call silos and things working in silos. So I've heard about the fact that some of these programs are voluntary. You can't force people into it. Sometimes the people who need it the most aren't there. We're talking about recidivism and so on. We also have been talking about a parole system in Trinidad and Tobago. We have been talking about electronic monitoring. Again, something that I don't think they don't have the resources they need. Wouldn't it be possible for the Defense Force to design programs for persons who are eligible for early release based on whatever criteria they set up, who could be monitored by way of electronic monitoring bracelets, and who will only be allowed into a system of parole if they participate in one of your programs, and the day they drop off of the program, they're not there, they're not performing or whatever, it's back into prison. I mean, isn't that something that would connect a number of dots that people are, we just kind of sticking pins all over, but nobody just connecting them all? I mean, wouldn't that solve a multitude of problems in terms of dealing with recidivism? I mean, you're saying that your programs produce results if you could get people to come in and if you get the resources to do it and if they stay and all of that. So what can't it be that we can work together to find a way to get them in there, get them to stay, and target people who need it the most, which are the ones coming out from prison? Because we know from this committee and common sense that people coming out of prison have a hard time finding employment, they have a hard time accessing training, they have no job, no money, no family support, and really and truly they are put back on a pathway to reoffending. And that's a big part of the problem that we have in this country, where you have a high rate of recidivism. So would something like that not be able to work?
I am having a challenge recalling the program, but there is a program with an ex-commissioner of prison. Ms. Chance runs the program.
Mm-hmm. All right, okay.
Vision with a Mission. Thank you. That program, I think, and it's getting the support through the Ministry of National Security to run that. And they have the expertise and prisoners in the program, which is the best tool to help get people who you have the challenge with recidivism to get involved. The key thing, Chair, through you, is these individuals have to want that. We can't force. We could come up with the best programs, design them, and so on. But if people are not interested in availing themselves of the opportunity and imbibing it and becoming it, then all the best programs will not achieve what we want to achieve.
Well, that's why I mentioned the issue of a system of parole and tying it into parole, because you would only actually be allowed out on parole if you satisfactorily, participate in the program. Because Vision and Mission, who we've had before this committee on more than one occasion, they're an NGO, and yes, they get some funding and so on from the state, but it's also a voluntary thing, and people have to want it.
It's still voluntary.
It's still voluntary. I'm talking about making something mandatory and tying it to parole, electronic monitoring, and tying it all together.
Member Lakshmi, it may require a special majority, and you have a senior member of parliament next to you. Maybe you would have a word to see if we can get the support, because it brings me to my next question.
Let's continue to focus.
And it's a serious no. She has brought a good focus to this discussion. What changes, institutional, legislative, or otherwise, maybe you would want to recommend to aid in the implementation of a more comprehensive approach to addressing criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago? Yes, you'll give me your support. Yes, go ahead.
I'd ask my legal laureates to respond to that.
Yes, please. What changes, institutional, legislative, or otherwise, you would want to recommend may aid in the implementation of a more comprehensive approach to addressing criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago? If you don't have a comprehensive approach, you can give us a brief and submit the full response in writing.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. The question that you posed, Chair, is, I don't want to say a difficult one, but is one given the remit of the Defence Force, we are constrained to act within the confines of our Act. That being said, the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, by way of legislation, has been within the existing legislative framework and subsidiary legislation, contributed to the national landscape, as you would hear from the Chief of Defence Staff and members of the panel, in terms of security, safety, defence. If you add those three facets together in the issue of fighting crime, you will find that this is a circumstance which is well placed in another place. And I say the other place being where you sit on occasion or based on your responsibilities. The Defence Act, our primary legislation, is in need of reform. And as you would appreciate from other instances when you would have interacted with the Defence Force, our systems, though in some instances archaic, is still robust. And I will speak to internally for members of the Defence Force who find themselves aggrieved in matters. The Defence Act, as it stands, Section 194 and 195, provides for the grievance process by way of appeal to the Defence Council. You would also appreciate externally, let's say with the internal factors, we self-regulate. With the amendment to Section 85, by way of Act number 20 of 2020, you would find that the issues that some of the honorable members would have raised in terms of criminality and how it affects the Defence Force is that where someone is charged internally or by the TTPS, we have self-regulated in that we have introduced the measure of interdiction. What was not said prior, under Section 26 of our Defence Act, and I stand corrected, if someone is convicted by the civil court of any crime or any contravention, we have the ability to also discharge them. Because as you would appreciate, the discipline, the repute of the Defence Force stands paramount to any individual's actions. In terms of support to the TTPS, you would also appreciate that as it stands right now, we support, our primary role in aiding the civil power is exactly that. In order to extend the TTDF's role into matters of policing, it would do both the TTPS and the Defence Force a disservice. And I say that in the context of the remit of the TTPS is to investigate crime and where necessary lay the appropriate charges. If the TTDF or where the TTDF becomes involved actively in the pursuit of crime without the assistance of the TTPS, you will find that issues of evidence gathering, issues of forensics, issues of even the investigation may be compromised. So in terms of what legislative provisions we can do to assist in the national landscape, I will say at the first instance, we must consider that our Act needs to amend. And we are in the process of doing it.
What I would suggest you do, Director, Staff Judge Advocate, is to reduce your full answer in writing. Remember, Munilal, before we wrap up, you have one issue you wanted to ask? Yes.
I just want to raise a matter of administration, not operation, really. The Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force operates under the Ministry of National Security. Unlike the police, where the police commissioner is the accounting officer, and the Defence Force relies on the ministry and the permanent secretary through processes to approve monies and to have to procure equipment, whether large or small. in a reasonable time. What has been the experience of that over the years? And has that lent itself to keep back the delays in matters of servicing vessels or operational matters and so on? And is there a recommendation that in looking forward, there may be a need to decentralize the accounting to allow the Defence Force to have a particular budget, for example, approved and the ability to spend that and account, of course, for it over a period of time?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Chair, through you, the support we have had over time has been varying based on the availability of funding nationally. So it is not only the Defence Force that has been impacted by that challenge, but I can indicate that we continue to get the support because of the significant role, in particular, for example, the Coast Guard has to play and the challenge of needing to keep those vessels serviceable. The support continues to be there, and understanding the context of our financial regulations and the system, the contracts that are put in place are, let me say, front-loaded to make sure that we don't have that challenge, that we can get the spares and the maintenance in place, not depending on releases happening. But going forward, we continue to make recommendations, and one was recently approved to facilitate the management of that maintenance of the vessels, and I can say that we got the support that we requested. So we continue to analyze what is required, and with the changing environment, we will make the recommendations, and I trust that we get the support that we need.
Member Suk.
One quick question. As Member Dr. Munilal indicated, you spoke about a new contract being formalized. With in-house mechanics that you have, do you have the capability and also a parallel training program taking place so that when these service contracts do expire eventually, and you don't have to rely on the manufacturer, do you have your experts in-house gaining the knowledge going forward? And also, do you have the diagnostics and the tooling to be able to handle it in-house? Because some of these things are generally basic that you really carry for the different manufacturers for the engines. Do you have that capability?
Thank you for that question, Honourable Member. Chair, through you, yes, we have that capability. When we put these contracts in place, part of the contract is that our personnel go to the factories where the vessels are manufactured, so they get hands-on training and get certified by the original manufacturer of the equipment, so that we can do, let's say, level 1, level 2, level 3. The only things that we cannot do is when things that are required to the depth where you have to go to a dockyard, and it may mean removing an engine, replacing it, but we would be there to work along with them. So from a perspective, we have the ability to do our own maintenance. Part of the challenge, as I highlighted earlier, was the spares not being available, but once that happens, we will be able to do that.
You rebuild your own engines in-house?
No, we don't.
And the manufacturer, the most popular engine, is it one particular, is it a Caterpillar Cummins, is it anything like that, or you have any idea, or is it varied?
Correct. For the Coast Guard vessels that we have, both the Damen and the Ostal, it is the Caterpillar, and that is obvious based on the maritime environment with the engines that have withstood the test of time and the rigors required. We can do some level of maintenance on these engines, but we work with the local expertise in terms of from the manufacturer. Also, and you asked the question earlier about the certification and the warranty on these engines. So the local provider would do the repairs to ensure that we can benefit from the warranties.
And the local provider has been doing a good job so far?
Yes, they have been.
As Chief of Defence, the last question for this session, tell us what you say is or are the greatest challenges affecting the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force in their attempt to collaborate with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Force in addressing criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago. Tell Trinidad and Tobago and what you intend to do to overcome that challenge or those challenges.
Thank you, Chair, for that question.
This is your wrap-up, so tell us.
Any country with a military, I would think, would want its military to remain being a military and not law enforcement. So our biggest challenge is my men and women maintaining their core training and responsibility when we go out and do operations with police, we are doing something that generally we haven't trained for. And it puts my personnel in a challenging position because your training is to do certain things, and it is not law enforcement. It's not to protect and serve. That is the biggest challenge. What we are doing to address that is we are, based on initiatives we have taken, trying to bring the expertise that we bring to the table, operational planning, execution of operations effectively, which is not something the police may be expert at. But the military, based on wars and so on, we are excellent at that. So there is efforts to ensure that at each level in the police, so whether it's corporals, the sergeants in the divisions and so on, they would get that training from us. So in effect, we are hoping to make the police more proficient from that perspective in terms of running operations, more effective. And if they are more effective, then they would have a lot more success in the operations that they do from the aspect of the operation being planned properly, executed and supervised and so on, that it would result in the no longer the requirement not being there for the defense force to be working alongside the police. Until then, we will continue to do it because you have mentioned we have been doing this for some time. We'd have mentioned it, and you're not seeing the success. But also added to that is the other initiatives that are taking place, as has been highlighted, to address what is producing this ill in our society. So as efforts continue, which we and the police are doing, and we highlighted some of the issues that are doing that, it is hoped that we would reduce this challenge that exists because of some of our citizens who make the wrong choices and cause us the headache that we're having.
Air Vice Marshal Darrell Daniel and your staff, the committee wants to thank you for coming before us today in this public forum to assist and to give us your views on understanding the collaborative efforts between the Defence Force and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in the implementation of anti-crime strategies and trying to bring about a decrease in criminal activity in Trinidad and Tobago. We now wish to, and I think I can take that as your closing remarks, and we wish to thank you and your staff. At this time, I will suspend the public part of this meeting. I will invite you all just to not take your leave. I think we have something very short in store for you. So you take your leave so we can have our wrap-up meeting. So we'll suspend the public part of this meeting so that we can meet for a brief while, and we will join you shortly. Thank you kindly.